Well, hello, divination divas. Would you like it if I call you that from now on? Anyway, I'm playing a very dangerous game right now, which is that I'm recording a video and audio while uploading another one. And Macs are temperamental, so we're going to hope this works. I have a sort of walkthrough / review for you and a lot of rhyming scheme for tonight. And this is the Minoan Tarot by Lorenzi-Prince. And I was sent this deck, so full disclosure, I did not purchase it. But I like it. And so this is published by Arnell Art. And obviously, Lorenzi-Prince, fairly well known already for... This is not a new deck, by the way. This has been around for a while. But this artist, author, creator has two other decks. I think it's the Dark Goddess and the Tower of the Crone. Neither of which do I have. I have seen walkthroughs of them. I sort of have always liked them. I believe those are both out of print at the moment, but this one is not. And so Arnell sent this to me. One of the things I like about Arnell, and there's lots of things to like, is that she has sent me one other deck, and in both cases it was sort of like, I think you might like this, if you want to and you do respond to it, feel free to share it. And so there's no pressure to do a review or to do a positive review because it was sent to me. So, even though I didn't purchase this, I just want you to know that the impressions that I have are mine. But I do actually really like it. Now, things to know sort of at the get-go. I don't think this is a deck that's going to light everybody up. I think it's a deck probably not ideally suited to people who are starting their journey. I feel like having worked with this deck, having read the guidebook, having looked at the cards, having some kind of background and experience with tarot probably will benefit you from this particular deck. It is not traditional. And even if you have a numeral, this sort of, in a way, it's almost like a pip deck, except that the pips don't even have the number of elements on the card that a pip deck would. So if it's the 6 of whatever, it doesn't necessarily have 6 of the thing on it. But if you're sort of open and willing to experiment and not necessarily married to Rider-Waite-Smith images or even Thoth keywords and Marseille numerology, you've got something to play with here. Now, I will say, if you are familiar with any of those well enough to sort of have them internalized, then you don't necessarily need to worry about that. You can sort of call on your memory. But when it comes to the minors in this deck, they really are their own sort of thing. And there is a numerology in the little guidebook. It's not anything like anything I've ever seen before. And I like it. And when you sort of read the number associations that the author has and look at the artwork that was chosen, it does have a connection, but it's not necessarily going to be sort of intuitively at your grasp the way that it might be in other decks. So, this is the box. This is the steeple. Never mind. So, this is the Minoan Tarot, inspired by the people of ancient Crete and their devotion to their goddess, their land, and their creativity. Again, 2014. So again, not a new deck, by Lorenzi-Prince. And you can find her website at darkgoddesstarot.com. And then, of course, arnellart.com is where this came from. It's a really nice box. It's an interesting thing. I don't know much about historical Crete, and there was a minute where when I was looking at this deck, I thought, are we going to enter into a conversation about appropriation here? It's an interesting question. I'm throwing that out there at the beginning. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if you can appropriate a civilization that doesn't really exist anymore and that had really been absorbed into Grecian culture and others. What I can say is that the artist clearly did their research, spent a lot of time living in that area, and all of the art is essentially an abstraction of existing art. So while it's not photographs of existing art, it is every card is essentially based on either frequently a painting, but in some cases a sculpture of Minoan art from the various sort of epics within that culture and within that civilization. And the history of the world is very complex. This is ancient history, which makes it even more complex and even more distant. But it does have a quality that I find attractive and a thoughtfulness that I enjoy. The cards are large, I will say. They're kind of hard for me to riffle shuffling. Decks this size, often I can sort of find a corner shuffle or a side shuffle. That doesn't really work here, but they overhand shuffle nicely. So just from a size perspective, it's a little unusual. The back of the cards is thoughtfully chosen. And I will say that if you do get this deck, the guidebook is indispensable. If you watch my channel, you know that's not a thing I'm really responsive to a lot of the time. I think most decks don't really need the guidebook that comes with them. Where they're interesting to me frequently is just learning the artist's point of view and why they chose what they chose, if they choose to tell us that. In this case, there is a whole sort of cultural glossary that is worth knowing about. I think you can, impose your experience on these cards, but having the experience of reading the little guidebook, and it's not really long, is valuable. In fact, I will say that I would appreciate a larger book on this deck. I don't know if there is one. I did look and I didn't see anything, but there's enough of interest here that I think it would warrant more information. But again, you don't need it. I just think if you want to understand the choices, it's worth having. And every detail here seems to have been chosen thoughtfully. So, the introduction to the guidebook is by Rachel Pollack, which is of course a great endorsement. There is an introduction to the Minoan, epic. I mean, that's just the word I'm reaching for. Their chronology in history, and I won't read that to you, but it's worth knowing, and it's also where you sort of get a sense of how the artist and author chose what they chose. So this is again all sourced from. It's not the actual art. It's reproductions or abstractions of actual art from the culture. And then there's this description of the chronology of the Minoan sort of cosmology as we understand it. This is filtered through history, right? And history was written by essentially white conquerors, white anthropologists, white settlers. But this is what we understand. And the deck itself is inspired by what at least the artist understands of Minoan history, which was a goddess-centered, and not a polytheistic goddess, but a sort of what seems to have been a monotheistic goddess with consorts, which is interesting. And there's a lot of detail in here that I actually think is worth reading. And for example, what you'll understand about the culture, for example, Minoans exhibited open sexuality in their dress. Women's gowns were wop-waisted and bare-breasted. The men were wop-waisted, bare-chested, lusciously coiffed. Men wore short aprons and codpieces. Men and women wearing the garments of the opposite sex. Men and women wearing the garments of the opposite sex appear in religious and celebratory paintings. It goes on to describe the palace, the history, the height of their influence. It also talks about how in art of the time, women were depicted in lighter tones and men in darker tones. So as you look at the deck, you actually cannot tell just by looking at the physique of each card or each character, their gender. It's actually the tone of their skin. Men tend to have darker tones in Minoan art, women lighter tones. So it's really fascinating. Talks about the religion, talks about the card back, which is sort of my long way of getting there. The card back shows the double-headed axe called a labris, a primary religious symbol of the Minoans. This was not used as a weapon of war, but for ritual and ceremonial sacrifices. It was never shown in the hands of men, only feminine divinities and her priestesses. The Minoan Tarot image is based on a small gold offering from the Old Palace period, found in the, oh god, I really need to do my research, the Akalokari cave in Crete. I apologize for my terrible pronunciation. So, there is history to the choices. So we're going to look at the cards. I'm going to do a quick walkthrough. I could probably make a video about this that was exceptionally long. I don't know that that's a valuable thing for you to do. I'm going to zoom in. It's its own thing, and I think what I like about it, aside from this sort of crisp simplicity of the images, and my kind of interest in ancient history, is that it really is one of the things that happens with themed decks, which frequently I'm not a fan of, is that we get sort of the Rider-Waite-Smith painted onto an existing culture, and the culture itself is adapted, or the civilization is adapted to the Rider-Waite-Smith. When themed decks really kind of succeed for me is when the Rider-Waite-Smith is adapted to suit the world of the cards, and that's sort of what happens here. And so many of the major arcana are renamed. The suits of the minor are renamed. The courts are renamed. And though it features a traditional tarot structure, it has its own language. It's not impossible to translate. I think once you sort of familiarize yourself with it, it's easy to make those connections, and certainly the numbering helps. But it definitely twists and pulls the traditional imagery into this art rather than imposing the art and making it fit Rider-Waite-Smith, I think. Again, it's tough to say. How do you judge by a civilization that's it's extincted, essentially? So, many of the major arcana renamed. The Lily Prince would be the Fool. And I'm not going to read, I could read you the whole guidebook and it would be interesting to me, although this would be a far longer video than anyone I think would sit through. But I'll just read you, I want to give you a sense of sort of what you are experiencing. So the Lily Prince would be the Fool in traditional decks or other decks. So, let's see. I'll just read the whole thing. Restored under the direction of Sir Arthur Evans. Again, we're getting like Greek and Cretan culture filtered through white British story, right? Restored under the direction of Sir Arthur Evans and labeled the Priest King. So again, all of this art is based on existing art that was from the time period. This relief fresco from the New Palace period, Knossos, Knossos, was determined by later scholarship to be a composite of several fragmented figures of both sexes. Although the restorers were aware of the Minoans' artistic convention of white skin for women and ruddy skin for men, the Lily Prince was given a tan, setting this work apart from all the Minoan images. He is dressed in a man's apron, kilt, and codpiece, but wears the lily crown of an officiating priestess. In Evans' restoration, his arm is outstretched, but he has no hand, and lilies are at his feet. In the Minoan Tarot restoration, he is given a hand to hold the sacred lily. The Holy One walks a tightrope without effort or strain. The twisted rope is a string of possibilities that stretch between male and female, innocence and wisdom, the distant past and today. He is freed from rigid definition. He moves in ways of potentiality. He wanders into possibility and back again. Messages from the Lily Prince. Walk the path that calls for fresh devotion. Be flexible about how you get there. Set aside convention if you would be who you truly are. So that gives you a sense of how the guidebook is written. I'll give you a couple other examples. But so that would be traditionally the Fool. Again, in this deck, it's called the Lily Prince. And there's just a fresh, clean simplicity to the art that I find attractive. So the Magician, now this might be confusing for folks. The Magician is the Priestess, and then the Priestess is the Oracle. And so you get a little bit of I will say this is like a feminine deity-centered deck, but it's not exclusively feminine. So there's multiple genders and depictions here. But so you do need to sort of be aware that when you see the Priestess, it's not the High Priestess. The High Priestess would be the Oracle. The Priestess is actually the Magician. And this picture on the Oracle is actually a pretty famous statue, a sculpture that, again, has been recreated for this deck. I could go into all the art. I mean, I really think that it's a little guidebook, but it has a lot of information. It's going to give you a lot of information about what you're looking at. Do you need it? No, I mean, I think you can apply your traditional meanings to it, but it certainly enhances to have it. And so, I mean, this is a deck I haven't had very long. I've worked with it a little bit. I sort of go to the guidebook to see what I'm looking at, because it does impact, I think, the tone and the feeling of the reading. So this would be the Empress as the goddess, the Emperor is the god. And you can see sort of how, the skin tones are differentiated. So, the goddess is obviously paler, and then the god is what in the guidebook she calls ruddy, which is a very British expression, but it has a darker, redder feeling to it, and you see that throughout. The Singer would be the Hierophant, and again, like the names, once you sort of get a sense of what you're working with, it does kind of make sense. I'll just read this as an example because it is such a different name. So here we go. A group of terracotta figurines from the Cretan palace of Palaiocastro in the post-palace period shows the loss of a sophisticated technique that occurred after the fall of the palaces and their workshops, but they also show that joyous religious rites lived on. The singer strumming her lute is the central figure of the group. Her voice and accompaniment provide the pace and the focus for the dancers. She moves the energy of the group as one. They step to her rhythm, to the harmony of the group under her lead. Her intent is that they may all partake in the power and blessing of the great ones. She sings the traditional songs. There we go. That's where you get the Hierophant, right? Or the Pope. She sings the traditional songs, the teaching songs, the songs of grandmothers, and the legendary priestesses. The singer lends her voice to the goddess, and the dancers their movement to the body of the goddess, who lives in them as they dance and play and sing, and as they relive the ancient ways. When the ritual is over, each participant returns to her daily life with a stronger, more peaceful heart. So when you read the book, even though you don't necessarily look at this image or the title and connect with the traditional association of tradition, for example, with the Hierophant, you can see that the choices were deliberate and they make sense. And then as you know that, it's sort of you get it as you read the cards. Here's the Lovers. It was a great description. I'm not going to read them all. Many of the descriptions of the trumps are really interesting. Chariot, Strength, Visionary would be the Hermit generally. I love the art. I really just think there's like a clean, simple loveliness to it. Here's the Wheel of Life. Balance would be Justice traditionally. The Hanging Woman would be the Hanged Man. The Ancestor as Death. Again, like when you see that, you're like, oh, okay, that kind of makes sense. And then you read the guidebook. I'll read that for you. Ancestor. From the Neolithic through the height of the Minoan power, the dead on Crete were laid to rest with reverence in family tombs or caves. Although grave goods became increasingly rich as the island prospered, only after the fall of the palaces did there appear this ritual scene of making offerings to the dead in a clay model from the village of Camilleri. The ancestor is shown larger than life, sitting on a chair and facing his or her descendant. The one presently alive stands at an altar and holds out a libation bowl, seeking to bridge the gap of silence and of breath, and the gap between glory and grief for the love, the beauty, and the life that has been lost. The ancestor has been where the living have yet to go. What are stories, legends, or whispers? What are stories, legends, or whispers was to the old one's red-blooded existence. What are stories, legends? Oh, I see. What are stories, legends, or whispers was to the old one red-blooded experience. The ancestors provide the archetypes, ancient forms which can frame a new life. If they would speak, one would learn the reality of the past and understand how to better live in the present. And so from that, you can see death in that card in a specific but appropriate and connected way. So flow would be temperance, ecstasy would be the devil, shipwreck would be the tower, the star. I love this moon card so much. It's so beautiful. I'm going to read this one to you too because, well, you're my captive audience unless you decide to, click away, which is your prerogative. The image for the moon is taken from a fragment of a terracotta sculpture of the goddess found in a Psychro cave. She has kept one wide, dark eye and a red mouth open as if to speak, but the rest of her beautiful face is lost in darkness. It's so cool and beautiful. She represents the powerful longing to flow out of oneself, to join with something or someone greater. She has also the desire to understand the past, to know the source from which one came. With her black and staring eye, the moon perceives and penetrates the veil of time. With her red lips, the moon whispers fragments of a grand and glorious story. Mere splinters, yet they invoke the song carried in the rush of the blood, the pulsing river that joins humanity to the life of the beasts, the tides of the sea, and the wells of mystery. I mean, come on. The sun. Transcendence would be judgment. And then the world tree would be the world. And so then we get into the suits. Now, I am obsessed with art for fire or wands. Move these aside. So it's art, sea, sky, and earth, I believe. Yeah. Which makes total sense. So sort of adapting yourself to the suits is not dramatic. Now, as she says in the guidebook, there's no numerology that was specific to the Minoan culture and civilization. And so she sort of worked with what she knew, which is completely different from, for example, what I have learned. And so one in this guidebook anyway, is individuality, 2, sensitivity, 3, creativity, 4, practicality, 5, adaptability, 6 is harmony, 7, spirituality, 8 is power, 9, consciousness, and 10, transformation. Now, I don't think necessarily you're going to get that intuitively by looking at the images. I like that it's simple. You could sort of put that on a piece of paper and have it in front of you. I have found that there's benefit even, I'm not, again, a guidebook person, but when looking at the suits, it's sort of worth looking at what she wrote in the guidebook, because in the choices I have found that when I understand the number and the choice of the art or the source of the art, I kind of get it in a way that I wouldn't if I hadn't looked at the guidebook and learned both her numerological association and the source art. I don't think you need it. I mean, I think the art is simple enough that you can work with your own system. But I do think, if you want to sort of understand why the choices were made, they're there. And I think for the most part, you can see the connections. Again, like not everything rings loud and clear to me, but I don't think that that's the case for anybody. But from an aesthetic standpoint, I think it's really lovely and it works really nicely. And I am obsessed with art as fire or as wands. So here's the Ace of Art, Art 2, 3. I'm not going to read through this. I'll give you an example or two. I think there's one that really struck me. Art 4, 5. There are times where you see a connection to Rider-Waite-Smith familiarity, and there are times when you don't. And I think you just sort of need to be okay with that. Again, this is not a deck that I would say your first or second or third deck. Like, I think if you're going to work with this, you either have to have sort of a tradition of working with non-scenic situational pips, or like a lot of confidence in your own system. 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 10. And so the courts are different. So we have worker, priestess, master, and mistress. And let me just, I don't think I put them back in the order that she created them in. So I just want to see. I think the courts come at the end. Yeah, they do. So worker would be page, priestess would be knight, master would be queen, and mistress would be king. So I think I may have inverted no, I didn't. Worker. Yeah, worker is page, priestess is knight, master is queen, and mistress is king. So our worker, priestess, master, and mistress. And then we get into the suit of C, which would be cups. So we have the ace, 2, 3. So again, here's where you see that like these are abstractions of existing art for the most part. And so, you have these dolphins. There's not 3 of them. This is the 3 of C. It's not 3, so you just have to sort of know that. And here on the 4, you do have 3. 5, you have 1. Let me just give you an example. I probably should have read more of these. It's a very specific thing, but I think the choices seem to make sense as I have looked at this. What is this 5? C5. So you get a sense of where this was chosen from. An engraved gem from the Old Palace period shows a scaros fish, also known as a rasa, which is Wrasse. The entire fish was eaten in ancient times and highly regarded. Even their intestines were considered more delicious than the flesh of any other fish. This made them special to epicures and rare today, but their lives are more unusual yet. When frightened, Rossas dive under the sand so fast one can't even see a blur, almost as if they disappear. They secrete a cocoon of slime for themselves that helps shield the electrical impulses of their hearts, so their location is not apparent to predators while they sleep. These fish may be constantly active during both night and day for up to 2 weeks at a time, and then sleep 72 hours straight. Rasa have been known to change sexes both ways, a trait shared by very few groups of fish. Extreme adaptation is what works for these scaros fish. And so if we go back to her description, 5s represent adaptability. And so you can see that makes a lot of sense, but you would need to sort of study the guidebook to know that. Now you could read 5 for me as disruption. There's nothing here in the image conflicting with that. I could do that fine. But there is something interesting about going to the source and saying, oh, that's why there's a fish on this card. It's not just a random image. It was chosen for a reason. But the reason has to do with the numerological choices associated with the guidebook. So it benefits study. Here's the C6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And there's just, again, a cleanness that I really appreciate. Here's the worker. Oops. The priestess. The master. And the mistress. And then we get into sky, which of course would be air, or swords traditionally. There's the ace, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I love owls. Let's read that one, shall we? That's the Sky 7. The archetypal owl engraved on a gem from the Old Palace period appears almost exactly the same a millennia later on Greek coins as the symbol of Athena, the goddess of wisdom. Along with their power to shine light into dark places with their magical eyes, owls are able to turn their heads 180 degrees to look behind them, signifying the ability to see into the past as well as the future. Their mythology is complicated, as dread has often been attached to owls due to their association with the night and one's mortality. Yet Minoan art displayed no fear of, nor any obsession with death and darkness. With the owl as guide, the soul willingly gazes into shadows and learns the secrets that have been obscured by brightness or activity. The owl understands that wisdom lies in more than accumulation of facts. Underlying motives and unconscious actions must also be examined. And so that's 7. The number 7 in this deck associates with spirituality. So again, you can see the connections. Here's 8, 9, 10. There's the worker, the priestess, the master, and the mistress. And then we get into Earth, which is obviously coins or pentacles. Sorry, I don't know why I'm holding the guidebook and doing this one-handed. The ace, the 2, the 3, 4. Those are rhinoceroses. 5 is a hare. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Earth worker, Earth mistress. This is obviously an image we've seen before. Master and mistress. And so there you have it. Now, as I mentioned, it overhand shuffles nicely. I really cannot riffle shuffle it. I've tried different ways. But I like it a lot. I think it's a really interesting deck. I think it's an interesting approach. I think it's thoughtfully connected to tarot in its connection to Minoan art. And clearly there was a lot of research done in connection to this, and it wasn't sort of created from whole cloth. So fascinating, really cool. I like it a lot. And I think it actually would benefit from kind of an expanded guidebook, to be honest. I'd love to know more. But that's that. So this is the Minoan Tarot by Ellen Lorenzi-Prince, published by Arnell Art. You can find the deck at Arnell Art's website. I will link that below. And I hope this was interesting, and I hope you're well. Be good.